During the medieval period, young boys were taken on by knights as apprentices. They would first serve as pages and then around 14 years old would become squires. A squire would be charged with simple but important tasks, such as carrying the knight's armour, shield and sword, ensuring the knight's armour and weapons were in good order, and taking care of the knight's horses. He would also be responsible for arming the knight as well as his horse. When a squire was more experienced, he would act as flag bearer or shield carrier and accompany the knight to tournaments and onto the battlefield during times of war. It was on the battlefield that the squire could really prove his loyalty and skill. He would be required to protect the knight and replace the knight's sword if it were broken or dropped, as well as the knight's horse if it were injured or killed. The squire would also be expected to hold any prisoners that the knight might take, rescue the knight should he be taken prisoner, and ensure an honourable burial for the knight should he die. If he proved himself worthy, the squire would be elevated to the status of knight. This mature stallion stands at 15.5 hands tall and weighs about 750 kilos. He is similar in size and build to the finest and strongest type of medieval warhorse known as the Great Horse or destrier. Destrier comes from the Latin word dextarius, meaning right-sided, perhaps because the horse was led by the squire's right hand. Like a medieval destrier, this horse has powerful hind quarters, a short back and muscled loins, ideal for sprinting, springing, spinning and stopping. This strong physique means that he is able to carry a knight in full armour. Destriers were specially bred and trained to carry knights in battle. They were also used in martial war games such as the joust, which began in the 11th century both as a sport and to provide training for battle. Destriers cost many times more than other types of horses to purchase, and they were also expensive to train and outfit, so only the wealthy could afford to keep them. Other types of horses were used for other tasks. Palfreys were used for everyday riding, for example, while sumpters were used to carry heavy packs. For a knight to carry out his role as an armed servant of his lord, he needed a correctly armoured horse. It was the job of the knight's squire to fit out the horse, rather than the knight himself. The fittings used depended on whether the horse was being prepared to enter the battlefield or the tilt yard for a joust. Here, the horse is being fitted out for a tournament, rather than a battle. The saddle is the first piece to be fitted by the squire. It is typical of medieval and Renaissance saddles in having a high front and back. This is to prevent the knight from becoming unseated. Medieval and Renaissance saddles were padded with wool or horsehair for comfort, support and protection, and covered in leather or textiles. They were made by professional saddle makers for an individual horse and rider to ensure a perfect fit. It was essential that the saddle did not catch the armour at any point and inhibit the rider. The saddle is fastened onto the horse by an adjustable strap, known as the girth, which is tied under the horse's belly. Once the saddle has been fitted, the squire then puts decorative barding onto the horse. He attaches the breastplate, which stops the saddle from slipping back. He then attaches the crupper, which stops the saddle from slipping forwards. Once the saddle has been fitted, the bridle can then be fitted. This is used to direct and control a horse. It consists of a headstall with a bit, which is inserted into the horse's mouth. A bottom set of reins are also attached to the bit. This bottom set of reins allows the knight to manoeuvre the horse with great accuracy. Now the decorative barding is in place, the squire can fit the protective metal armour, which is used to protect the horse, but also to display the wealth and status of the knight. It was usually made in steel and was often decorated. The horse's face was protected by the chafron. Many chafrons were decorated with a roundel with a small spike, so the horse ended up looking like a unicorn. Full horse armour would also consist of a set of segmented plates called the crinnet, which protected the horse's neck, a pétrole, which protected its chest, flanchards, which protected the flanks, and the crupper, to protect the hindquarters. The final element to be fitted is a second upper set of reins. These reins are used to control the horse in normal riding. Like the rest of the decorative barding, they are highly ornate. Leather was very expensive and it's been dyed red, and lavish metal plates have been attached for decorative purposes. With the upper set of reins now firmly attached, the horse is ready to receive his knight. Fitting a knight into his armour was, and still is, quite a laborious process. Even with an experienced squire, the whole process takes about 20 minutes, and it takes about the same amount of time to remove the armour. The knight wears a special clothing under his armour. On his top half he wears an arming doublet. This is a special jacket made of very strong cloth. It has many pairs of strong leather laces attached to it, which are called points. These are used to tie the armour securely in place. On his bottom half, the knight wears very tight trousers, called hose, and strong sturdy boots. The arming process always follows a set pattern and starts from the legs up. The knight you see here is going to be fitted into an armour of the type made in Milan in the early 1500s. The first piece of armour to be fitted are the greaves. These are designed to protect the lower legs. These are complex pieces and were especially hard for the armourer to make. The greaves being fitted here are made in two pieces, which are hinged together at the outside edge. Sometimes the knight would fit his greaves himself. Having clicked them together, he uses leather straps and buckles to secure them tightly onto his legs. The next piece of armour to be fitted are the cuisses. These protect the upper legs, the thighs, knees and upper shins. The squire holds the cuisse in position against the knight's leg, while the knight uses the points to tie them onto the top of his arming doublet. The squire then secures the cuisse tightly into place using 3 straps and buckles. The squire then brings out the male skirt. This is made up of hundreds of tiny metal rings linked together to allow movement to the waist, whilst also protecting the knight's groin area. The squire and knight double check that all the metal links in the male skirt are okay. The squire then helps the knight pull the male skirt over his head and chest down to his waist. It's a bit of a squeeze as it's designed to fit fairly snugly. The male skirt is then tied firmly in place at the back. The squire then fetches the male standard. This forms an additional layer of protection around the neck. Having been checked to ensure all the links are straight, it is fitted around the neck and buckled in place at the back. The squire ensures that the male standard is kept in position on the arming doublet by threading a pair of points on each shoulder through it. Now the squire can start to add the body armour. First on is the cuirass, which is made up of a breastplate and backplate. Here, the breastplate is hinged onto the backplate on one side. The squire opens up the cuirass and fits it over the knight's chest. He buckles it at both shoulders and buckles it under the knight's right arm. This breastplate has been fitted with a lance rest at the right side of the breastplate. The next piece of armour to be fitted is the placard. The purpose of the placard is to protect the lower vital organs. Like the cuirass, it is made in two pieces, a front half and a back half, which are hinged together on one side. Its lower half is constructed of movable plates, or lames. These allow maximum movement by sliding over each other, rather like the plates of an armadillo. The placard is opened up and fitted around the knight. It is buckled at the top onto the cuirass and then buckled tightly together at the unhinged side. Some adjustment is required to ensure that the two halves are strapped together as tightly as possible. The squire then fetches the tassets. These are a pair of plates that are tied onto the bottom of the placard, one over the top of the right thigh, the other over the top of the left. These provide further protection to the groin area. Now the squire turns his attention to protecting the knight's arms. The rear brace is the armour that protects the upper arms. The vambrace is the armour that covers the lower arms. The squire carefully laces the top of the rear brace onto the arming doublet using the points. The knight, meanwhile, buckles the vambrace into position. Then the elbow protectors, known as the couters, are tied in place. The squire is now well on the way to having his knight in full armour. Despite being clad in so much armour, the knight still has complete freedom of movement, which is of course vital on the battlefield or the tilt yard. The squire then fetches the pauldrons. These are designed to protect the shoulders of the knight. These also have movable plates to permit the knight to raise his arms above his head. The squire uses the points that he had thread through the mail standard to secure the top of the pauldrons in place. Having done so, he then buckles the lower inside edge to the top of the rear brace. The knight's cap is now removed in readiness for the helmet. It is replaced with a tight-fitting bonnet that goes under the helmet, is tied tightly under the knight's chin. The squire then brings out the helmet, which is a really vital piece of armour as it protects the knight's head. Helmets came in many different forms in the medieval and Renaissance periods, and this type, which entirely encloses the head of the knight, is called an armet. It was used for warfare as well as jousting. This armet is very splendid. It is crowned with the knight's elaborate crest and has a long flowing cloth tail. These features help to distinguish him from other knights, as every knight had a different crest and colours. The squire opens up the helmet and then carefully closes it around the knight's head, securing it at the bottom. The squire then slides an extra plate into position around the neck and buckles it into position. This is called the wrapper, because it literally wraps around the front of the helmet for additional protection. The gauntlets are the final elements to be placed on the knight. These protect the hands and are composed of many small plates of metal cleverly fixed together to give maximum movement and maximum protection. The squire assists the knight put the gauntlets on the knight's hands. Having checked and closed his visor, the knight is now, at last, ready for action. There are several misconceptions about knights in armour. One of these is that the armour was so heavy and cumbersome that it was difficult for the knight to move. This is not at all the case. While armour was certainly heavy, normally weighing in the region of 40 to 70 pounds, or about 20 to 30 kilos, knights were fit and strong through constant training and were used to wearing armour for long periods without removing it. Armour was designed to be flexible and to allow full movement. Another misconception is that knights needed to be winched onto their horses. This was never the case. Most knights were very athletic and mounted their horses in pretty much the same way that a person not wearing armour would do, by using the stirrups and saddle for leverage. If necessary, they might use a mounting block, and they would dismount in a similar way.